So it used to be each.
Now तुम्हाला secretary.
Yeah, so on that level, he had his own secretary.
Yeah.
So at an executive level, you had your own secretary.
Yeah.
But underneath that, you had a pool.
No, afterwards they transition to a pool.
Okay. So you would call the pool up, and they would dispatch a secretary
Right.
to take your dictation.
Yeah, usually you walk over there.
You would walk over to the secretary pool,
Yeah.
and that's fascinating. All of that's gone.
Yeah.
That's all ancient history,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't there when I was young. But we didn't do much writing. Okay, so that's the other thing. Old ways of officing, because they required a secretary in general, did not really require writing so much.
Yeah.
Even the intellectual jobs didn't do much writing, right? Like you would then say you were spending time with a project. Generally speaking, either that project would be a group work, right? You would be in a collaboration, which is the way, like you can see IDEO, and they're bringing people in with a whiteboard, and that's rare now. You have to pay specialists to do this.
Sure.
Now the intellectual worker is sitting in front of their own computer on a word processor, right? But before word processors existed, you just did without much writing. You just didn't write it up. You just maybe brought it up at the meeting and had little scribble notes. Now, you would keep notebooks more meticulously in those
Right.
days.
Engineering now.
You would have engineering notebooks, and they would actually maybe be filed properly.
Right.
Right.
Word and file and witness.
Right. You would even maybe sign it to say I witnessed it later or whatever, right? You would take those engineering notebooks very, very seriously. So there's no real equivalent to that anymore, because just you may keep a diary on your laptop, but you mostly don't. It's interesting that practice of keeping filed notes, the computer created a shortcut for that, but we don't really use it anymore like that. Like there's a persistence of memory that's kind of gone by the wayside since then. Okay, so
Any enterprise has some persistence of memory, but they don't know how to do that.
they do it with a search prompt, right? That's how you on your own computer if you wanted to
We
search.
hired a powerful consulting group to come and talk to us about how to. That was already 15 years ago. Applied people came and gave the lecture of how we should retain memory and touchdown.
Correct.
Enterprise memory.
And there was a thing, they rarely refer to it anymore, but it was called the intranet,
Yeah.
right? And so you would have the internet, but then you'd have the intranet,
Yeah.
right? So the intranet would connect your employees, to each other, and it took a really long time for anybody to catch up to word processor for sharing of documents. And so nowadays you'll have companies like Dropbox and Box and Atlassian and Slack that are attempting to do internal communications within a company, internal document intranets, right? But before, like, word processors came first, and then the internet, and then the intranet, sort of, except you would say maybe in a college context, you always had an intranet also. You'd always have some kind of a file sharing, but I guess what I'm saying is there's an Adam and Eve moment here, where there's like a pre-literacy moment, right? And this era of the secretary pool, it's like a pre-literacy moment, right? You're talking about using text in very rare contexts compared to today where you're just texting on WhatsApp casually, right? Back then, the creation of text.
I thought I would never go to text. All of a sudden,
Yeah.
my mom was always on
It's amazing how the text has kind of taken over the universe. And so the culture of talking to your secretary, who then types it up, that required secretaries to have unique skills. I know because I'm aping those skills now when I do your dictation. I know it's not easy, right? So the skills that were unique and rare that are now commonplace, I guess, are you would be able to type very fast, right? And you would be able to take shorthand. Shorthand has kind of gone by the wayside, right? And there's an interpretive task that the secretary has to do, right? Like if the person's not clear, they have to be able to state it clearly, right? There's a way in which me and Tue are both your secretaries, because he will take the idea that I will type up and even more expand it to say things you might have missed or fill in gaps in your explanation based on what he knows as an engineer, right? So our startup is you and two secretaries. This is kind of the way it is. You see what I'm saying? Like I'm your secretary and Tue is your secretary. Like we're both doing different tasks of pulling the idea out of you, okay? But you, as the idea originator in this company, right? You are operating on a pre-literate way. You're operating in a whiteboard kind of way, right? A graph paper with a pen at most. Sometimes you will be dictating right out of your head, right? Einstein, right? And I think one of the things I'm getting at with my app is everybody's got this Einstein inside them that doesn't have time to type. It's pre-literate, their understanding of things, right? But what this new version of the app is doing is it's making the secretary role that much more attractive, right? It's making it a game. It's making it fun to type it up. Like the whole flow of it now is to the type screen and type it up. You can also just share it. If you want to just share it, you just share it. But this concept of the secretary pool is very interesting because that's ancient history, right? But it is the only way to get any kind of text made, right? So what would you type up with the secretary do? It would be a memorandum, maybe an invention, right? And so in order to do that, you would bring maybe a rough draft that you'd written to the secretary pool, like talking points.
Yeah. Pencil. Pen. I never use pencil, but pen.
Okay. So what I guess I'm saying is that in that operation you have the pencil notes, right, that lead to you orally talking, right? And that the secretary would then take and interpret, right? So we've just made you your own secretary now, finally, after all these decades of having, right? So let's say you're a good author, you're Stephen King, you're sitting down in front of Microsoft Word and you're about to write. My guess is that really good authors, they talk it out before they type it up. They're like, wow, this is how we do it, right? That the typing like this is they've made it an oral process. Even though it's like this, it's actually coming from the oral side of the mind. So when you really are sitting down to journal and you're not thinking you get very good at typing, you can kind of flip onto that. But this makes it easier, right?
And they will also type it out of dictaphone. Just like you.
Dictaphone. You would also dictaphone it and then send the dictaphone tape to the secretary pool and it would come back typed.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what this is. It's exactly that. So the word we're dancing around is the word transcription. So you think of this as self-transcription. Okay? So where you run into an annoying pushback is, oh, what about auto-transcription? Can't you do it for me? Right? And So the answer is it's not as good. It's not as good as you actually listening and typing it up. If a robot did it, there would be all these mistakes, there'd be errors, it wouldn't be able to account for two names, two voices, I'm sorry. Right? There are many, like it can only do like a 5-second snippet at a time. But there's a business model in this for us someday, if millions of people start using it, where I don't want to type it up, pay 99 cents and we'll type it up. Like that kind, we set up a service that will actually record, because those services exist. They're very expensive. They're like $1 a minute or something like that, right? But we could set up a service which would actually do the listening and typing it up and then email you back the results. So, for instance, this tape that we're making, it might be 15 minutes long. Maybe rather than spend the time myself, I'll send it to the secretary service to get the text back. But the point is to get them to want that distilled text at the end of the day and make them work for it, right? They should do the work of the secretary. And then it's all inside the app. All of this, the brilliant thing about all of this is these instructions I'm giving Faraj don't involve building something new. They just involve change this word, change very subtle changes, right? It was always built to do this. And that's why it's going to be very good at it. It's like, okay, thank you for telling me about the secretary pool and that story. How far away was it from your office?
Oh, not very far. Usually, they will be in the entrance of the building. Entrance to the building is a large hall, mostly ladies.
So the entrance to the building. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about that is IBM made its money on typewriters.
Yeah.
So they're going to be the best at having
very interesting thing is,
yeah.
research orientation.
Yeah.
Employee orientation.
Employee orientation, yes.
They ask strict questions to all of us. Okay, what's IBM's business? Okay.
Yeah.
And they're still making typewriters, but
Yeah.
they said, oh, whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, typewriters. Say selected typewriters. Computers, whatever. They said, no. Just keep this in mind. IBM's business is information processing.
Information processing.
Okay, it could be anything. So even at that stage, they were kind of looking forward. And they said, oh, even as we are talking, the typewriter is not going to be any more IBM typewriters. They are going to be discontinuing the typewriter.
Wow. So, see, this concept of this company made its money on typewriters, right? Its business model then is to get every company to adopt the secretary pool.
Weighing machines and typewriters.
Weighing machines also.
Yeah, MD card is where I started.
Yeah.
They used to
Scales.
Scales.
But I'm going to say the typewriter was the big.
Yeah.
That's
typewriter was a very big.
because they didn't do cash registers like NCR.
I threw away because of a problem. I had a selected typewriter.
So foolish.
Yeah.
That's a foolish thing to throw. We had this insanely large storage unit. We could have brought everything. I wish we had that experience to do it again. But everything's well, it's end well. Okay, but this concept of a company who can only really make money off your company if they get you to change your habits with regards to you should have a secretary pool, right? Like the ideal company for IBM has a secretary pool or ought to have one, but may not have one yet because they don't own typewriters, right? Like in other words, they are selling a machine. Okay, this is about the history of typewriters now, right? Like how did IBM get into that business, right? And
other people have done typewriters. IBM came up with the selectric.
the Selectric,
Yeah, the ball.
the ball. because there were other Smith Corona or whatever. There were other companies that made typewriters, but that Selectric was before computers. That was a big hit for IBM.
Yeah.
That made them very.
For a short time, AT&T also
made typewriters.
I had AT&T typewriter, IBM typewriter. I had the Smith Corona, and the 3 or 4 typewriters for you.
So nobody in that entire era thought of a combination dictaphone typewriter, right? Let's just say even a simple thing where you'd have a typewriter with a cassette tape deck and a microphone. So possibly in radiology you did, right? Possibly that's radiology's the cutting edge for this. That was one, But in general, see, what I guess I'm saying is I'm reinventing the typewriter. The concept of audio as a genesis for typing, right? That's the exact process of I'm going to get a dictaphone, make a cassette, and mail it to my secretary at the pool, and they're going to type it up and send it back to me. And all of this is now in one app. And the voice memos don't do that, right? You can't type in the voice memos. This is very interesting that IBM began as a typewriting company, really. That was their first hit product. And that was what I wanted to say. The other way that could have forked is IBM could have become a cash register company, right?
They called it Office Products Division, OPD.
Oh, Office Products Division. See, NCR I think of as the company that did cash registers.
Right. Yesterday I was reading about NCR here.
Yeah.
The rest of the program is still a very viable company.
NCR is still around.
They get rolled out.
Wow.
And they've done cash machines and
Sure, but I'm saying that if they had made the Selectric was a typewriter. Typewriters led them to word processing in computers,
yeah.
right? Whereas cash registers may lead you to a spreadsheet. That's also important. Numbers are very important, but this concept of IBM Selectric as being a writing information tool and not a number information tool is very intriguing. And I think that's what led to word processing. And so you have this company, Wang. And I remember that Wang failed because they focused on word processing only.
Yeah.
And it's the same with Palm Pilot. Palm Pilot failed for the same reason. The Palm Pilot is famously only 4 functions. There's no apps, right? It's not. Later they probably had apps. They're trying to save the company, but basically, Palm Pilot is calendar, notepad, alerts, to-do list. Like very basic.
And at one time, their valuation for a brief time was higher than that of General Motors.
Yeah. Palm was a big deal. And you look at the iPhone and you see why. What if Palm had come up with the iPhone?
Yeah.
Right? So Palm had a last product called the Trio. But do you know who killed Palm? It wasn't the iPhone.
Yeah.
It was BlackBerry. BlackBerry killed Palm. BlackBerry was a phone that had a PDA in it that you could type into with a real keyboard. And Palm came up with the Trio in competition. But it wasn't good enough. But I had a Palm 5. It was a hit product.
Yeah, stainless steel.
It was beautiful. In fact, you kind of want one for a different reasons. It's like the graffiti, it was very cool. But you see now that the iPhone has subsumed all of that, right? So
I like that when you're typing, the typing age, whatever that comes up, is very sophisticated. It guesses what you use.
It's called predictive typing. Predictive.
Very, very good.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
I don't know how they program it.
I think it's based on some kind of reporting back to Apple of what everybody's typing.
Yeah.
And then it says statistically the next word will be this.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Maybe you're right.
And maybe there's some local memory. So
Local
it knows
memory,
that if you type APA, you're going to type a pernod.
Yeah.
Right. So it has some kind of local, it blends both. Right.
Local and global.
Yeah. There's probably some kind of, and then there's probably some kind of basic dictionary phrases.
Yeah.
Right? So that's like a kind of a canon, right? But then it probably adjusts it according to the world.
It has in everything.
Right. So it's interesting. So this is the Marshall McLuhan side of it, though, is this, the history of typing,
Yeah.
right? The history of typing and creating one of the world's most important companies, IBM,
Yeah.
right? Like, most likely, I hate to say it, they sold typewriters to the Nazis,
Yeah.
right? Because they were the only ones making it, and typing is important. Typing is very important. And so I was here, I would bring it, the last thing I was pointing out is, I was about to kick typing out. I was about to say, tired of typing. But then something stopped me, and now it's like the most important thing. It's very, well, one of the most important things. Anyway. And that was 21 minutes of talking, you and me, right?